I noted through my experience with the women that there's immense labor in the sort of at the core of their existence, their day in, day out.
That's what really struck me, the lack of support and the lack of action.
What really impacted me was the women that we worked with. The issues that I saw a lot that really moved me is just how much abuse there is.
The things we experienced, we distilled into this art installation, and I'm hoping that viewers can take some of that with them in terms of awareness and careness.
A lot of my work focuses on our everyday, on our material belongings, and on the things that we do every day, our actions, our routines. And I chose to follow these interests and see how they manifested in the women's lives. One of my pieces is a series of sculptures, sculptures of bags made out of concrete. They're titled burdens. Sort of evidently, they're these very heavy objects. These women carry all of their belongings. I wanted to talk about the physical weight and emotional weight of these belongings. On these women, so it's backbreaking to carry a bag or carry your bags all day, but beyond that, they need these things. They need their things so much so for different reasons, whether it be practical or emotional or because they are markers of their identity or their previous selves. There are over 500 suspended socks behind me, so each sock represents one woman. So I wanted to talk about the immensity of the problem, just the number, the sheer number. They're socks because socks are a highly requested item at the shelter. So with the installation of them, I was able to bring in other elements. So they're suspended from a rebar grid, which begins to talk about the structural insufficiencies on the peninsula of dealing with the problems encountered by these women. And they're hanging by an outdoor thread. They're hanging with a bobby pin, and they're attached to the ground with Scotch tape. So these are all everyday objects. There's an idea of kind of using what you have and making do with it, and you gotta just figure it out as you go, and that's a really big reality to these women. So I wanted to use objects that were readily available. The socks themselves are hanging like they are because in that way they have a continuous sway to them. They're in motion. One of the big things in meeting these women and in getting to know them is really, their lives are always in motion. They are never fully at rest. And I think that, think about that. Think about how that would contribute to your exhaustion if you are never actually at rest. Whether they are given somewhere to sleep that night or not, they're still never fully in their own comfort or in their own space. And so these socks that kind of sway and that move more as viewers walk through them, to me was a way to talk about that motion in their lives.
For me, I come from more of a fine craft tradition, so having to think more conceptually and bring more content to my work was a challenge. That piece is called Notice, and it's of horsehair, which is the primary medium I've used for about the last 20 years, but worked in a very different way, very loose. It's a sort of a composite portrait of several of the women, and meant to be nearly invisible, so it's mostly white horsehair, hanging from clothes hangers, wire clothes hangers. It speaks to a lot of the women expressing how invisible they felt when they were out in public. And also the hangers, the closet rod, represent a desire for them to want to feel nice and to have nice clothes and to have a place to put clothes. In talking with the women and doing a little background research, there is a lot of having to go back and forth by the women, different agencies, a lot of different forms, a lot of waiting, and to get housing. And so the houses I created a mold and used shredded paper of forms that are related to being in a home, and made 128 houses out of the shredded paper, cast them, and with each house representing about a week of waiting for housing. So it's about 2-3 years average.
Part of it was that awareness of how fragile everything is, how thin that margin is, how what separates us from some of these women is a safety net. Many of the women we met had houses, had been evicted for various reasons. Housekeeping, keeping house. This whole video would not exist if I had not met these women, heard their stories, not only the struggles of the women without shelter, but in general, the unacknowledged work of women kind of comes up in the imagery. The struggles that the women went through, the psychological space one might be in, trying to survive, feelings of abandonment, loneliness. The women are trying to reinvent themselves, pull themselves out of this situation. So the various conundrums that I create through the performances are images that came to me in relation to the stories that I would hear. Can You Hear Me is my title because I feel that it's very hard for these women to have a voice. The spoken word piece that you can experience under this dome sort of tumbled out of me after doing the art workshops with the women. In this sound piece, maybe one can contemplate your own sense of comfort versus what some other people are going through. Because within it, there is some wishing and hoping for change in the repetition, sort of a plea. So my hope is that to create access point to empathy for other people, for viewers. If it's uncomfortable, that's okay. This is uncomfortable. This is not pretty.
After the first set of workshops that we had where we met a number of artists, and everyone was very timid about getting their picture taken. In fact, that's an understatement. So it was a matter of building trust with the women to be able to get them to agree to let me photograph them. These women agreed to let me take pictures only if I painted their eyes. The installation is called Witness, and when I interviewed them and took pictures as I was talking to them, I told them, first of all, as I'm taking your picture, what do you want people to see in your eyes? How do you feel? And my concept was to be able to create an installation where people would come close to each person and get a sense of what they were feeling, as well as a reciprocal empathy for each other, and then maybe understand what it feels like to be looked at all the time. A few of these reference pieces came about when I told the women what I wanted the impact to be. I said, I understand from meeting several women that you feel like you're looked at all the time, but you're never really seen. And at the same time, you want to be able to be seen, but you need to stay invisible. And it's a really, really terrible juxtaposition to live in, because we all need our voices and we all want to be seen and we all want to be witnessed. And yet, if you are living without a home and you're a woman, there's a big likelihood that you are too much at risk to have your identity known. So this is a way to give them presence, that moment of impact when some of the most emotion shows in their eyes, because they felt like finally they were understood.